We need soldiers, not secretaries playing dress-up in tactical gear.
Lieutenant Bradley Mercer's voice cut through the morning briefing like a serrated blade, each syllable dripping with the kind of contempt reserved for those who believed their rank entitled them to cruelty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the tactical displays as he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his own authority. His perfectly pressed uniform bore the gleaming insignia of someone who had earned respect through paperwork rather than sacrifice, and his smirk suggested he found particular pleasure in dismantling others in front of an audience. The morning briefing had been running for 23 minutes, and his patience with the blonde civilian analyst was wearing dangerously thin. Supply analytics specialist Sage Westfield stood beside the digital map, her gray tactical shirt crisp despite the early hour, blonde hair pulled into a precise high bun that somehow managed to look both professional and defiant. Her ice blue eyes never wavered from the screen as she traced deployment routes with surgical precision, her finger moving across coordinates with the kind of familiarity that should have been impossible for someone with her supposed clearance level. "You'll need secretaries to write the casualty reports." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, spoken with such quiet certainty that the temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Sage's finger paused on the map for exactly 2 seconds before she turned to face Mercer, her expression unchanged, revealing nothing of the storm that was about to break. Someone's coffee cup clinked against the conference table. The air conditioning seemed to grow louder. General Harrison Pike looked up from his tablet, suddenly aware that the professional tension in the room had shifted into something much more dangerous. The other officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the electricity in the air, but not yet understanding its source. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And in that moment of perfect stillness, everyone present realized they were about to witness something that would change everything they thought they knew about supply analytics specialist Sage Westfield. Mercer's face flushed red with rage at her response. The audacity of this civilian contractor, this nobody with her government-issued tablet and her cheap tactical shirt, daring to speak to him like that in front of his peers. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood, his 6-foot frame towering over her more modest height. The veins in his neck bulged as his hands clenched into fists. "What did you just say to me?" His voice had risen to just below a shout, and spittle flew from his lips as he spoke. The other officers in the room tensed, recognizing the signs of Mercer's famous temper beginning to boil over. Colonel Garrett Kane half rose from his seat, as if to intervene, but something in the civilian analyst's posture made him pause. Sage remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged. She didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't show even the slightest sign of intimidation, despite being outnumbered 15-1 in a room full of combat veterans. Her ice blue eyes met Mercer's furious gaze with the kind of steady calm that spoke of experiences far beyond what her personnel file suggested. "I said you'll need secretaries to write the casualty reports," she repeated, her voice carrying the same quiet certainty as before. "When your tactical planning gets soldiers killed because you are too proud to listen to intelligence analysis." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Mercer's face went from red to purple. His military career had been built on projecting strength, on never backing down from a challenge, especially not from some civilian contractor who had probably never heard a shot fired in anger. The humiliation of being spoken to this way in front of his subordinates was intolerable. "That's it." Mercer's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper as he stepped closer to Sage, his shadow falling across her face. "I've had enough of your attitude, you arrogant little—" The punch came without warning, a vicious right cross that connected with Sage's jaw, with a sound like a wooden board snapping. The impact sent her stumbling backward, her hand flying to her face as blood began to trickle from the corner of her mouth. The room erupted in shocked gasps and scraping chairs as several officers jumped to their feet. "Mercer, stand down!" Pike's voice boomed across the room, but the lieutenant was beyond hearing. The satisfying crack of his fist connecting with her face had felt like vindication, like finally putting this uppity civilian in her place. Sage straightened slowly, her hand coming away from her mouth stained with blood. But instead of tears, instead of the submissive apology Mercer expected, her expression remained unchanged. If anything, there was something that might have been disappointment in her eyes, as if she had hoped for better from him. "You just violated Article 3 of the SEAL Code," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the blood on her lips. The statement was so unexpected, so precise, that it caught everyone in the room off guard. Mercer laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the briefing room walls. "What would you know about the SEAL code? You're not even military." Without breaking eye contact, Sage reached up and slowly pushed back the sleeve of her right arm. The motion was deliberate, almost ceremonial, and every eye in the room followed it. What they saw made several people gasp audibly. Etched into her forearm in stark black ink was a tattoo unlike anything most of them had ever seen. 3 interlocked triangles formed the framework of a spearhead, but the design was far more complex than it appeared at first glance. Within each triangle were symbols that spoke of operations so classified that their very existence was debated in military circles. At the base of the design, barely visible unless viewed from exactly the right angle, were the letters RPC, Red Protocol Clearance. "I wrote Article 3, Sage said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room with the weight of absolute authority. Along with the other 14 articles that formed the foundation of modern special operations ethics. The silence that followed was deafening. Pike's tablet slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the conference table as he stared at the tattoo with growing comprehension. His face had gone pale as he began to understand the magnitude of what had just occurred. On the wall-mounted display behind Sage, her personnel file flickered and changed. The boring details of a civilian analyst dissolved, replaced by classifications so high that most of the people in the room shouldn't have been able to see them. Red clearance flashed across the screen in letters that seemed to burn themselves into the retinas of everyone watching. The blood on Sage's lips seemed to mock them all as she stood there, no longer looking like a civilian contractor, but like exactly what she was. Someone whose very presence in their briefing room should have been impossible, whose identity was buried so deep in the classified world that her existence was more rumor than fact. "Sweet Jesus," someone whispered from the back of the room, the oath hanging in the air like a prayer. The lights in the briefing room suddenly shifted from the harsh white of fluorescent bulbs to the angry red of emergency illumination. A klaxon began to sound somewhere in the depths of the building, its wailing cry penetrating the reinforced walls and steel doors of their secure facility. The change was so sudden, so jarring, that several officers jumped to their feet in confusion. "Lockdown initiated," came the mechanical voice of the base's automated security system, speaking with the emotionless precision of artificial intelligence. "Physical assault detected on Red Protocol personnel. All exits sealed. Security response teams en route." The heavy steel door of the briefing room slammed shut with a sound like a bank vault closing, followed by the distinctive click of electromagnetic locks engaging. They were trapped, all of them, in a room that had suddenly become a prison. Red lights bathed everything in an ominous glow that made the blood on Sage's lips look black. Mercer's face had gone from purple to ashen gray as the implications of what he had done began to sink in. His eyes darted between Sage's calm expression and the locked door, then to the classified information still glowing on the wall display. The confidence that had carried him through years of military service evaporated like smoke in a hurricane. "No," he whispered, shaking his head as if denial could somehow undo the last 60 seconds. "No, this can't be right. You're just a contractor, just a glorified secretary with a security clearance." Pike was studying the information on the screen with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that could save his career. The classifications listed beside Sage's name read like a who's who of operations that officially didn't exist. Black sites in countries that denied their presence. Hostage rescues that were attributed to other agencies. Terrorist cells that had simply vanished without explanation. Their members found dead in circumstances that defied logical explanation. "Operation Blood Moon," Pike read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. The name meant nothing to most of the people in the room, but Pike had been briefed on enough classified operations to recognize when he was looking at something that could get people killed just for knowing it existed. Sole survivor status. Active. The words hung in the air like an indictment. A sole survivor of an operation that wasn't supposed to exist, sitting in their briefing room and enduring abuse from a lieutenant who had probably never been closer to real combat than a training exercise. "I'm curious. Where are you watching this from?" The disrespect Sage just faced happens in military bases worldwide, but justice has no borders. Comment on your country below. Let's see how global our audience really is. Elena Torres, the sympathetic intelligence analyst who had been taking notes throughout the briefing, found her voice first. "Ma'am," she said, addressing Sage with a respect that had been notably absent from the room just minutes earlier, "we didn't know. The briefing materials listed you as civilian personnel." Sage turned her attention to Elena, and for the first time since the confrontation began, something approaching warmth flickered in her ice-blue eyes. "That was intentional, Analyst Torres. My presence here isn't about revealing my identity. It's about determining whether certain individuals can be trusted with sensitive information." Her gaze shifted back to Mercer, who had pressed himself against the far wall, as if trying to meld with the reinforced concrete. The lieutenant's breathing was rapid and shallow, the kind of hyperventilation that comes from realizing you've made a mistake that could end your career, your freedom, and possibly your life. "The SEAL code exists for a reason," Sage continued, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen what happened when those codes were ignored. Article 3 specifically prohibits the use of violence against fellow service members except in cases of immediate life-threatening danger. You struck me because you were angry, because your ego was bruised. That makes you exactly the kind of person who shouldn't be trusted with the lives of others. The implications of her words settled over the room like a shroud. This wasn't just about a single punch anymore. This was about fitness for command, about trust, about the kind of character that separated true leaders from those who simply wore the uniform. Pike cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the enclosed space. "Ma'am, if I may ask, what exactly is your mission here? Why were you assigned to observe our briefings?" Sage's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes that suggested Pike was asking better questions than the others. "I'm afraid that information is above your clearance level, General. What I can tell you is that certain elements within the Navy's Special Operations community have raised concerns about operational security and command integrity." The words sent a chill through the room that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Operational security concerns meant that someone, somewhere, suspected there was a leak or a traitor in their midst. Command integrity issues suggested that someone was worried about officers making decisions that could compromise missions or get people killed. Carter Hayes, one of the junior officers who had been silently enjoying Mercer's treatment of the civilian analyst, suddenly found his voice. "Are you saying we're under investigation?" "I'm saying that events like what just occurred demonstrate why such investigations might be necessary," Sage replied, her tone carrying no accusation but making her point clear nonetheless. When officers can't control their temper in a briefing room, how can they be trusted to make life or death decisions in combat zones? The red lights continued to bathe the room in their ominous glow, and the sound of boots in the corridor outside suggested that security teams were indeed en route. The electromagnetic locks on the door meant that nobody would be leaving until the automated systems determined that the threat had been neutralized or until someone with the proper authority codes overrode the lockdown. Magnus Fletcher, the base security chief, had been notably quiet throughout the confrontation, but now he stepped forward with the careful movements of someone who understood that he was navigating a minefield. "Ma'am, I need to ask about the lockdown protocols. Red protocol clearance triggers are above my access level. How long are we looking at being sealed in here?" Sage considered the question for a moment before answering. "That depends on several factors, Chief Fletcher. The system is designed to contain potential security breaches until they can be properly assessed. Given the nature of what just occurred, I would estimate we'll be here until someone from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service arrives to take statements." The mention of NCIS sent another wave of unease through the room. Nobody wanted to explain to federal investigators why they had stood by and watched while a fellow officer assaulted someone with clearances so high that most of them couldn't even see the full details of her file. Mercer had slumped against the wall, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "This is insane," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "How was I supposed to know? She looked like any other contractor." "That was the point," Sage said, her voice carrying a note of what might have been disappointment. "The ability to blend in, to appear unremarkable, is what allows people like me to do our jobs. Unfortunately, it also reveals things about people like you that might otherwise remain hidden." Pike was still studying the classified information on the screen, trying to piece together a picture of who exactly they were dealing with. The operations listed in Sage's file read like a greatest hits collection of anti-terrorism activities from the past decade. Names and locations that he recognized from intelligence briefings. Events that had been attributed to other agencies or dismissed as accidents. "Operation Thunder Road," he read aloud, his voice barely audible. Operation Nightfall, Desert Phantom, Blood Moon. Each name carried weight, represented missions that had shaped the current state of global security in ways that the public would never know. Sage's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes at the mention of Blood Moon. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Pike caught it. Years of reading people's reactions had taught him to spot the tells that revealed when someone was carrying emotional weight they didn't want to display. The sound of voices in the corridor outside grew louder, accompanied by the distinctive beep of someone entering access codes into the door's electronic lock. The red lights in the room suddenly switched back to normal fluorescent white, and the electromagnetic seals disengaged with a series of metallic clicks. The door swung open to reveal a tall woman in a Navy captain's uniform, flanked by 2 security personnel in tactical gear. Captain Sarah Mitchell stepped into the room with the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention, her eyes quickly scanning the occupants before settling on Sage. "Agent Westfield," she said, using a title that made several people in the room exchange glances. "We received the automated alert. Are you injured?" Sage touched the corner of her mouth where the blood had dried. "Nothing serious, Captain, though I believe we have some procedural matters to address." Mitchell's gaze shifted to Mercer, who seemed to shrink under her scrutiny. "Lieutenant Mercer, you're confined to quarters pending investigation. Security will escort you." She turned to the rest of the room. "Everyone else, I need individual statements about what occurred here. Agent Westfield, if you could accompany me." As the security personnel moved to escort Mercer from the room, Sage gathered her materials with the same calm efficiency she had displayed throughout the confrontation. She paused at the door, looking back at the assembled officers with an expression that was difficult to read. "The SEAL Code exists to prevent good people from making bad decisions under pressure," she said. "What happened here today suggests that some of you understand that principle, while others have forgotten what it means to serve something larger than yourselves." Her eyes lingered on Elena Torres for a moment, and the analyst felt a brief nod of approval before Sage turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind a group of officers who were beginning to understand that they had just witnessed something that would change their careers forever. The briefing room felt different after she left, as if her presence had been holding something in check that was now free to manifest. Pike looked around at his remaining staff and saw confusion, fear, and in some cases, a dawning realization that they had been part of something much larger than a simple briefing gone wrong. Drake Sullivan, the technical specialist who had been quietly operating the room's electronic systems throughout the morning, spoke up for the first time. "Sir, should I secure the classified displays? The information that came up during the lockdown is still visible." Pike nodded absently, his mind still trying to process what he had learned. "Yes, secure everything. And Drake, nothing that happened in this room gets discussed outside of official channels. Is that clear?" The chorus of acknowledgments from around the room was subdued, lacking the crisp military precision that usually characterized such responses. Everyone understood that they had just become part of something that would require careful handling. As the room began to empty, Elena Torres lingered behind, ostensibly organizing her notes, but actually thinking about the brief moment of connection she had felt with the mysterious woman who had endured so much abuse with such dignity. There had been something in Sage's eyes, a recognition of kindness in a room full of hostility that suggested this encounter might not be their last. Outside in the corridor, Sage walked beside Captain Mitchell with the measured pace of someone who had been through similar debriefings many times before. The tactical gear and formal procedures were familiar territory, even if the circumstances were more dramatic than usual. "How bad is it?" Mitchell asked quietly as they walked toward the administrative section of the building. "Worse than we hoped, better than we feared," Sage replied. "Mercer is exactly what we suspected, an officer who can't control his temper when challenged. But there are others in that room who might be worth salvaging." Mitchell nodded, making mental notes for her report. The analyst, Torres, possibly. She showed moral courage when others remained silent. That counts for something in this business. They turned a corner, passing beneath security cameras that would record their movement but not their conversation. The corridors of the naval base were designed to channel sound in specific ways, creating pockets of privacy for those who knew how to use them. "What about Pike?" Mitchell continued. "His reaction to seeing your file was interesting." Sage considered the question as they walked. "Pike is more complex than the others. He has enough experience to understand the implications of what he saw, but his reaction suggests he might be someone who can learn from this experience rather than simply try to cover it up." They reached a secure conference room where Mitchell's aide was waiting, with a stack of official forms and a recording device. The process of documenting what had occurred would be thorough, detailed, and ultimately would determine the future careers of everyone who had been in that briefing room. As Sage settled into a chair and began the formal process of giving her statement, she reflected on the mission that had brought her to this point. For 3 years, she had been moving through the military establishment like a ghost, observing, testing, and documenting the character failures that could compromise operations and cost lives. What had happened in the briefing room was just one data point in a larger investigation, but it was an important one. The tablet that Mitchell's aide placed in front of her displayed the beginning of a detailed incident report. Sage's encrypted tablet displayed tactical frequencies, the same secure communication systems special operations rely on during critical missions. She began typing her account of the morning's events, starting with Mercer's initial disrespectful comment and working through each escalation point with the precision of someone who understood that every detail might be scrutinized by investigators. The blood on her lip had long since dried, but the taste lingered as a reminder of what happened when military discipline broke down. She had endured worse in the field, had taken more serious injuries in situations where the stakes were life and death rather than merely career-ending, but there was something particularly bitter about violence born of ego rather than necessity. As she worked on the report, her mind drifted to the folder she had left in the briefing room, the one that contained materials related to her current investigation. Among those papers was a photograph, old and creased, that showed her with a team of operators who no longer walked the earth. Operation Blood Moon had ended 3 years ago with casualties that officially had never existed, in a place that wasn't supposed to be on any map. The photograph was deliberately placed where observant individuals might catch a glimpse of it, another piece of the puzzle that formed her cover identity. To most people, it would look like a personal memento, perhaps a reminder of family members who had served. Only someone with access to highly classified information would recognize the faces or understand the significance of what the image represented. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside drew her attention back to the present. Through the Friend conference room's reinforced window, she could see base personnel going about their normal duties, unaware that their morning briefing had just become part of a federal investigation. The machinery of military justice was beginning to turn, and its gears would grind slowly but inexorably toward conclusions that would reshape several careers. Captain Mitchell returned to the room carrying a secure phone and wearing the expression of someone who had just received difficult news. "Agent Westfield, I've just been informed that Admiral Langston wants a personal briefing on this incident." The mention of Langston's name caused Sage to pause in her typing, her fingers hovering over the keyboard for just a moment longer than necessary. Admiral Jonathan Langston was the kind of officer whose reputation preceded him wherever he went, a man whose influence extended far beyond his official position on the Naval Special Operations Command staff. "When does he want to see me?" Sage asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Immediately. His aide is arranging secure transportation." Mitchell studied Sage's expression, looking for any hint of concern or apprehension. "Is there something I should know about your history with the Admiral?" Sage saved her work and closed the tablet before answering. "Admiral Langston has been briefed on certain aspects of my current assignment. His interest in this incident is not unexpected." The careful phrasing was typical of the classified world, where direct statements could compromise operations or reveal information to those who didn't have a need to know. Mitchell understood the code, recognizing that there were layers to this situation that extended far beyond a simple assault case. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Sage gathered her materials with the methodical efficiency of someone who had learned never to leave important documents unattended. The investigation that had brought her to this base was complex, involving multiple agencies and touching on operations that spanned several years. What had happened in the briefing room was just one thread in a larger tapestry of corruption and security breaches that threatened the integrity of special operations. The transportation that Admiral Langston had arranged turned out to be an unmarked sedan with tinted windows and diplomatic plates, the kind of vehicle that could move through traffic without attracting attention while providing its occupants with complete privacy. The driver was a young petty officer who had clearly been briefed to speak only when spoken to and to take the most direct route to their destination. As they drove through the Virginia countryside toward the location where Admiral Langston was waiting, Sage watched the landscape pass by and thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. The mission that had brought her to Norfolk Naval Base was part of a larger investigation into operational security breaches within the Special Operations community. Someone was selling information to hostile foreign agencies, and that someone had access to classified materials at the highest levels. The punch from Lieutenant Mercer had been an unexpected development, but not an unwelcome one. His reaction to being challenged had revealed character flaws that made him a potential security risk, the kind of officer whose wounded pride could be exploited by foreign intelligence services. The incident would be documented, analyzed, and added to the growing file of evidence that suggested the Navy's Special Operations community had serious problems that extended far beyond simple personnel issues. The sedan turned off the main highway onto a private road that wound through dense forest, leading to a facility that didn't appear on any public maps. The gate guards wore civilian clothes, but carried themselves with the bearing of military personnel, and their weapons were the kind issued to protect details for high-ranking officials. This was clearly a place where very important people discussed very sensitive matters away from prying eyes and recording devices. Admiral Langston was waiting in a conference room that overlooked a lake surrounded by pine trees, the kind of setting that suggested tranquility while housing conversations that could reshape international relations. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of bearing that commanded respect without requiring any demonstration of authority. His uniform bore the ribbons and insignia of someone who had served in every major conflict of the past 3 decades. "Agent Westfield," he said, rising from his chair as she entered the room, "I trust your injuries aren't serious." "Nothing that will affect my operational capability, Admiral," Sage replied, taking the seat he indicated across from his position at the conference table. Langston studied her face, his eyes lingering on the small cut at the corner of her mouth before meeting her gaze. "I've read the preliminary reports about what occurred this morning. Lieutenant Mercer's behavior was unacceptable, but I'm more interested in what his reaction reveals about the broader security situation at Norfolk." Sage opened her tablet and pulled up the files related to her investigation. "Mercer fits the profile we've developed for potential security risks. Officers with impulse control issues who can't handle challenges to their authority are prime targets for recruitment by hostile intelligence services. Someone who will strike a fellow service member over a perceived slight might be willing to sell classified information to settle a grudge or feed their ego." The Admiral nodded slowly, making notes on his own tablet. "And the others who were present, your assessment of their potential vulnerabilities?" Most of them were simply following the lead of the ranking officer in the room. Social dynamics in military units tend to amplify the behavior of the most senior person present. When Mercer was openly disrespectful, the others felt permission to be disrespectful as well. Sage paused, scrolling through her notes. However, Analyst Torres showed moral courage by maintaining professionalism despite the hostile environment. She bears closer scrutiny as a potential asset rather than a liability. Langston made additional notes, his expression remaining neutral throughout their discussion. General Pike's reaction was particularly interesting. His immediate recognition of your clearance level suggests he has access to information that should be restricted to a much smaller group of individuals. This was the heart of the investigation, the reason why Sage had spent months moving through different military installations while maintaining her cover as a civilian contractor. Someone with access to highly classified information was sharing that information with people who shouldn't have it, creating security vulnerabilities that could compromise ongoing operations. Pike's knowledge could be explained by his position on the Joint Operations Planning Staff, Sage noted, but the speed of his recognition and his obvious familiarity with Red Protocol classifications suggests he has access to information outside his normal purview. Or someone has been briefing him on matters that should be restricted, Langston said, his voice carrying implications that didn't need to be stated directly. The investigation had identified several points where classified information appeared to be flowing beyond its intended recipients. Operational details that should have been known only to the personnel directly involved in specific missions were turning up in briefings and conversations among officers who had no operational need for such knowledge. The pattern suggested either a systematic breakdown in security protocols or deliberate leaking by someone with broad access to sensitive materials. As their conversation continued, Sage became aware of activity outside the conference room. Through the large windows that overlooked the lake, she could see additional vehicles arriving at the facility, their occupants moving with the purposeful stride of people responding to an urgent situation. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the water, and the peaceful setting seemed increasingly at odds with the tension that was building inside the building. Admiral Langston noticed her attention shifting to the windows and followed her gaze. "It appears we're about to receive additional briefings on related matters," he said, his tone suggesting that he had been expecting these arrivals. "Agent Westfield, I need to ask you about Operation Blood Moon, specifically about the circumstances that led to your survival when the rest of your team was lost." The question hit like a physical blow, even though Sage had been expecting it eventually. Operation Blood Moon was the defining event of her career, the mission that had ended with her as the sole survivor of a team that had been betrayed by someone they trusted. The official reports were classified at levels that made her current identity documents look like public records, and the truth about what had happened was known to fewer than a dozen people. "What specifically do you want to know, Admiral?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the emotions that the topic stirred up. "I want to know if you believe the security breach that led to your team's compromise is related to the current investigation," Langston said, his eyes never leaving her face. "The timing is suggestive. 3 years ago, your team was ambushed because someone provided your location and mission parameters to hostile forces. Now we have evidence of systematic information leaking within the special operations community. The patterns are remarkably similar." Sage felt her blood run cold as the implications of his words sank in. She had spent 3 years believing that the betrayal of her team was an isolated incident, a tragic failure of operational security that had cost the lives of people she loved, like family. The possibility that it was connected to a broader conspiracy, that her teammates had died as part of a larger pattern of corruption, changed everything. "You believe the same person responsible for Blood Moon is behind the current leaks?" she asked, her professional composure beginning to crack slightly around the edges. "I believe we need to consider that possibility," Langston replied. "The methods are consistent. Information gathered from multiple sources, synthesized in ways that suggest access to centralized databases, and then distributed to recipients who use it to maximum advantage. Your team walked into an ambush that could only have been possible if someone provided detailed intelligence about your operational planning." The room seemed to grow smaller as Sage processed this information. The memorial challenge coin she carried in her pocket, the one bearing the names of her fallen teammates, suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. If their deaths were connected to the current investigation, then everything she had been working toward took on a personal dimension that went far beyond professional duty. Outside the windows, the new arrivals were entering the building, their voices carrying down the corridors even through the soundproofed walls of the conference room. The peaceful afternoon was about to become something much more intense, and Sage realized that her simple assignment to assess security risks at Norfolk Naval Base had just evolved into something that could provide answers to questions that had haunted her for 3 years. Admiral Langston closed his tablet and stood, indicating that their private conversation was about to expand to include the new arrivals. "Agent Westfield, what I'm about to share with you is classified at levels that exceed even your current clearance. But given your personal involvement in Blood Moon and your current investigation, I believe you have both the need to know and the right to know." Sage stood as well, her mind racing through the implications of what she was hearing. The investigation that had started as a routine security assessment was about to become a pursuit of the person responsible for the deaths of her teammates. The punch from Lieutenant Mercer, which had seemed like a significant event just hours earlier, now felt like a minor footnote in a much larger story. The conference room door opened to admit 3 people, whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Captain Mitchell was followed by 2 individuals wearing civilian clothes, but carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. Their credentials identified them as belonging to agencies whose names were more familiar from movie screens than from real-world encounters. "Agent Westfield," one of the newcomers said, extending his hand in greeting. "I'm Agent Harrison from the Defense Intelligence Agency. This is Agent Cooper from Naval Criminal Investigative Service. We understand you've had an interesting morning." The formality of their introduction and the specific agencies they represented told Sage that this had moved far beyond a simple assault investigation. The DINNCIS only became involved when matters touched on national security, and their presence suggested that someone believed the events at Norfolk Naval Base were connected to threats that extended far beyond military personnel issues. "Gentlemen," Admiral Langston said, retaking his seat and gesturing for the others to join him around the conference table. Agent Westfield has been briefed on the potential connections between her current investigation and Operation Blood Moon. I believe it's time we shared the full scope of what we've discovered. Agent Harrison opened a secure briefcase and removed a tablet that bore security classifications Sage had never seen before. The information he began to display painted a picture of systematic corruption within the special operations community that extended back nearly 5 years and involved personnel at levels that should have made such betrayals impossible. Operation Blood Moon was the first incident we can definitively link to this conspiracy, Harrison explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent months analyzing classified materials that most people would never see. Your team was betrayed because someone provided detailed intelligence about your mission to hostile forces, but it wasn't an isolated incident. The tablet screen showed a timeline of operations that had suffered unexpected compromises, missions that had encountered resistance that should have been impossible given their classification levels, and personnel who had been captured or killed under circumstances that suggested advance warning by enemy forces. The pattern was clear once laid out in sequence, but it had taken years of analysis to recognize the connections. 17 separate operations over the past 5 years, Agent Cooper added, consulting his own notes. 43 American personnel killed or captured, hundreds of millions of dollars in compromised intelligence assets, and all of it traceable to information that could only have come from someone with access to the highest levels of operational planning. Sage stared at the timeline, seeing the dates and locations where her former teammates and other operators had died because someone had sold them out for money or ideology or simple revenge. The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering, extending far beyond what she had imagined when she began her investigation at Norfolk. "Who do you suspect?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Admiral Langston exchanged glances with the 2 federal agents before answering. "We have reason to believe that the source of these leaks is someone who has been involved in planning and oversight of special operations for the entire period in question. Someone whose position gives them access to information from multiple agencies and whose movements would not attract suspicion." The implication was clear, even though they weren't stating it directly. They suspected someone within their own command structure, someone whose betrayal represented not just a security breach, but a fundamental violation of everything the military claimed to stand for. The investigation that had brought Sage to Norfolk was part of a larger operation designed to identify and expose a traitor whose actions had cost dozens of lives. As the afternoon shadows grew longer across the lake, Sage realized that her simple assignment to assess Lieutenant Mercer's character had led her into the middle of the most significant counterintelligence operation of her career. The punch that had revealed her identity had also revealed her personal connection to crimes that demanded justice not just for professional reasons, but for the memory of friends who had died trusting the wrong people. The pursuit of answers was about to begin in earnest, and this time, it was personal. The secure facility by the lake had transformed into a command center within minutes of the federal agent's arrival. Additional personnel moved through the corridors with the efficiency of people who had rehearsed these procedures countless times, setting up communication equipment and establishing secure links to agencies whose existence was rarely acknowledged in public forums. The peaceful conference room now hummed with the quiet intensity of an operation that could reshape the intelligence community's understanding of its own vulnerabilities. Agent Harrison pulled up additional files on his classified tablet, each document bearing security markings that indicated information gathered through methods that couldn't be discussed in open forums. "Agent Westfield, your infiltration of Norfolk Naval Base was more successful than we initially realized. The incident with Lieutenant Mercer has provided us with the opening we need to accelerate our timeline." Sage studied the new information flowing across the screen, recognizing BAMs and operations that she had been tracking through her months of investigation. The pattern was becoming clearer now that she could see the full scope of what they had discovered. Someone with access to the highest levels of military planning had been systematically compromising operations, and the evidence trail led directly through facilities like Norfolk. "The assault on you this morning triggered automatic security protocols that we can use to our advantage," Agent Cooper explained, consulting notes that bore the distinctive formatting of counterintelligence briefings. Red protocol lockdowns generate incident reports that must be filed with multiple oversight agencies. Those reports will draw attention from exactly the people we've been trying to identify. Admiral Langston leaned forward, his expression carrying the weight of someone who understood the political implications of what they were discussing. "Agent Westfield, We need you to return to Norfolk and continue your cover assignment. But now your mission parameters have changed. Instead of simply assessing security risks, you'll be gathering evidence about how classified information flows through that facility. The magnitude of what they were asking settled over Sage like a heavy cloak. Returning to Norfolk meant facing the aftermath of the morning's confrontation while simultaneously conducting an investigation that could expose a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of military command. The personal dimension added by the connection to Operation Blood Moon made the assignment even more complex. "What's my operational timeline?" she asked, falling back into the professional vocabulary that helped maintain emotional distance from the mission's personal implications. 72 hours, Harrison replied. "Our intelligence suggests that whoever is behind these leaks will move quickly to contain the fallout from this morning's incident. They can't afford to have someone with your clearance level conducting detailed security assessments at facilities where they operate." Captain Mitchell, who had been quietly observing the briefing, spoke up for the first time since the federal agents arrived. "Agent Westfield will need backup support. If the opposition moves against her directly, she'll need extraction capabilities that go beyond standard diplomatic channels." The mention of extraction procedures sent a chill through the room that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. In the classified world, discussions of extraction meant that someone believed the mission carried risks that extended beyond professional embarrassment to actual physical danger. The people they were investigating had already demonstrated their willingness to kill American personnel to protect their operations. "Extraction protocols have been pre-positioned," Admiral Langston assured them, "but our preference is to complete the mission without requiring those measures. The intelligence value of this operation extends beyond identifying the source of the leaks. We need to understand the full scope of the network they've established." As the briefing continued, Sage found her attention drifting to the challenge coin in her pocket, the memorial token that carried the names of her fallen teammates from Operation Blood Moon. The possibility that their deaths were connected to the conspiracy she was now investigating added urgency to the mission that went beyond professional duty. This was about justice for people who had died trusting the wrong individuals with their lives. The transportation back to Norfolk Naval Base was arranged through channels that ensured her return wouldn't attract attention from anyone monitoring official movements. The same unmarked sedan that had brought her to the lake facility would return her to the base, where she would resume her cover identity as a civilian contractor conducting routine security assessments. During the drive through the Virginia countryside, Sage reviewed the modified mission parameters on her encrypted tablet. The original assignment to assess personnel reliability had evolved into a complex counterintelligence operation designed to identify and expose a network of individuals who had been selling classified information to hostile foreign agencies. The stakes had escalated far beyond simple career consequences to matters of national security. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the naval base as the sedan approached the main gate. Security personnel conducted their routine checks with the same professional efficiency they displayed for every vehicle, unaware that the passenger they were clearing carried information that could expose fundamental security vulnerabilities within their own organization. Sage's return to the base attracted immediate attention, though not from the sources she had expected. Elena Torres was waiting near the main administrative building, her presence suggesting that the morning's events had created ripple effects that extended beyond the immediate participants. The intelligence analyst's expression carried concern, mixed with curiosity, indicating that she understood something significant had occurred. "Ma'am," Elena said, approaching with the careful respect that had been notably absent from the briefing room earlier. "I wanted to apologize for what happened this morning. Lieutenant Mercer's behavior was completely inappropriate." Sage studied the younger woman's expression, recognizing genuine concern rather than simple professional courtesy. "Thank you, Analyst Torres. Your professionalism during a difficult situation was noted and appreciated." The brief exchange carried implications that extended beyond simple pleasantries. Elena's willingness to approach someone who had been revealed to carry extraordinary security clearances suggested either remarkable courage or concerning naivety about the sensitivity of the situation. Either possibility made her someone who required careful evaluation. "If I may ask, ma'am, will you be continuing your assessment work here at Norfolk?" Elena's question was carefully phrased, but it revealed that she understood the morning's events might have compromised whatever mission had brought Sage to their facility. "My assignment continues as scheduled," Sage replied, choosing words that were truthful without revealing the evolution in her mission parameters. Though I suspect the environment may be somewhat different given recent developments. Elena nodded slowly, her expression suggesting that she was processing implications beyond what was being directly stated. "Ma'am, if there's anything I can do to assist with your work, please don't hesitate to ask. I believe what you're doing here is important." The offer was unexpected, coming from someone who had witnessed the morning's confrontation but couldn't possibly understand its full significance. Elena's willingness to align herself with someone who had clearly attracted controversial attention suggested either remarkable intuition about the larger situation or personal convictions that extended beyond simple career advancement. As they parted ways, Sage made mental notes about Elena's behavior for inclusion in her ongoing assessment of Norfolk personnel. The analyst's response to the crisis had been markedly different from her colleagues', suggesting character traits that might make her either a valuable asset or a potential security risk, depending on the circumstances. The administrative building where Sage maintained her temporary office had taken on a different atmosphere since the morning's events. Personnel who had previously ignored her civilian contractor status now watched her movements with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for visiting dignitaries or federal investigators. The revelation of her actual clearance level had fundamentally altered the social dynamics of the facility. Drake Sullivan, the technical specialist who had operated the briefing room's electronic systems, was waiting near her office with an expression that suggested professional curiosity mixed with personal concern. His presence indicated that the morning's technical anomalies had attracted attention from people who understood the significance of classified information displays. "Ma'am," Drake said, approaching with the careful respect that seemed to have become standard since her identity revelation, "I wanted to report on the technical issues we experienced this morning. The automated security systems responded to your classification level in ways that exceeded our normal protocols." Sage gestured for him to continue, recognizing that his technical knowledge might provide insights into how information flowed through the facility's electronic systems. Sage's encrypted tablet displayed tactical frequencies, the same secure communication systems special operations rely on. During critical missions. The lockdown protocols that activated during the briefing were triggered by biometric scanning systems that I wasn't aware existed in that conference room, Drake continued, his voice carrying the confusion of someone whose technical expertise had encountered capabilities beyond his knowledge. The automated response suggested that the facility has security measures that operate above the clearance level of the personnel responsible for maintaining them. This revelation aligned with the intelligence she had received during the Lake facility briefing about information flowing through channels that bypass normal security protocols. If Norfolk Naval Base had automated systems responding to classification levels that local personnel couldn't access, it suggested the facility was being used for purposes beyond its official mission parameters. "Mr. Sullivan, I'd like you to prepare a comprehensive technical assessment of the facility's information security systems," Sage said, framing the request in terms of her official cover mission. "Focus particularly on any capabilities that seem to exceed standard requirements for a facility of this classification level." Drake's expression indicated that he understood the significance of what she was requesting. A technical assessment of that scope would reveal whether the facility had been modified to support classified activities that didn't appear in official documentation. Such modifications would be expensive, complex, and would require authorization from levels of command that should have left clear documentation trails. "Ma'am, an assessment of that scope would require access to system specifications that are currently above my clearance level," Drake said carefully. "But given this morning's events, I suspect those access restrictions might be reconsidered." The implication was clear. Drake understood that the morning's security incident had created opportunities to examine systems and procedures that would normally be protected from scrutiny. His willingness to pursue an investigation that could expose uncomfortable truths about his own facility suggested either remarkable dedication to security or personal motivations that extended beyond simple professional duty. As evening approached, the pace of activity at Norfolk Naval Base began to slow to the reduced staffing levels typical of non-operational periods. However, Sage noticed that certain sections of the facility maintained higher activity levels than would be expected for routine administrative functions. Personnel movements suggested ongoing operations that didn't align with the base's official mission parameters. The modified mission parameters she had received at the lake facility included authorization to conduct surveillance activities that went well beyond her original assessment role. The investigation into systematic information leaks required detailed monitoring of communication patterns, personnel movements, and document handling procedures that could reveal how classified information was being extracted and transmitted. Her temporary office had been equipped with monitoring capabilities that appeared to be standard information technology equipment, but actually provided access to communication intercept systems operated by agencies whose involvement in domestic security matters was rarely acknowledged publicly. The technology allowed her to monitor data flows through the facility's networks while maintaining her cover as a civilian contractor conducting routine security assessments. The initial data gathered through these systems revealed communication patterns that aligned with the intelligence provided during her briefing at the lake facility. Classified information was indeed flowing through channels that bypassed standard security protocols, and the timing of these transmissions suggested coordination with external recipients who had advanced knowledge of when specific intelligence would become available. Your curiosity about her hidden past is about to be rewarded. Subscribe now to see the truth unfold. We bring verified military stories that challenge assumptions. The bell ensures you catch every shocking reveal. As Sage analyzed the preliminary data, her secure communication device indicated an incoming transmission from Admiral Langston's staff. The message was brief but carried implications that sent adrenaline coursing through her system. Package delivery scheduled for 0200 hours. Contents require immediate examination. In the coded language of counterintelligence operations, a package delivery meant that someone was preparing to move against her investigation. The timing suggested that whoever was behind the information leaks had indeed been monitoring the fallout from the morning's incident and had decided that her presence at Norfolk represented an unacceptable risk to their operations. The next 6 hours would determine whether her mission could be completed successfully or whether she would need to implement the extraction protocols that had been pre-positioned for her protection. The personal stakes involved in exposing the conspiracy behind Operation Blood Moon added urgency to the timeline that went beyond professional considerations. Sage spent the evening hours preparing for what intelligence professionals called a hard contact scenario, a situation where covert surveillance evolved into direct confrontation. The equipment in her office included defensive capabilities that weren't apparent to casual observation, but provided options for dealing with threats that extended beyond simple professional harassment. At 11:30 p.m., the first signs of unusual activity began to appear on her monitoring systems. Personnel who should have been off duty were moving through sections of the facility that weren't part of their normal operational areas. Communication intercepts revealed coded conversations that used terminology associated with security operations rather than routine administrative functions. By midnight, it became clear that someone was coordinating a response to her presence that involved multiple individuals and suggested planning that extended beyond spontaneous reaction to the morning's events. The opposition had recognized the threat she represented and was moving to neutralize that threat through methods that could range from administrative harassment to direct physical confrontation. At 12:45 a.m., her monitoring systems detected encrypted communications that included references to package containment and disposal protocols, language that indicated the opposition was prepared to use lethal force if necessary to protect their operations. The investigation that had begun as a routine security assessment had evolved into a life-or-death confrontation with individuals whose willingness to kill American personnel had already been demonstrated through Operation Blood Moon. Sage activated her emergency communication protocols, sending coded alerts to the support teams that Admiral Langston had positioned for her protection. The response would take time to coordinate, leaving her with a window of vulnerability that could extend for several hours, depending on the opposition's timing and methods. At 1:15 a.m., facility security alarms began to sound, indicating a simulated emergency drill that would provide cover for moving armed personnel through the base without attracting attention from off-duty staff or external monitoring systems. The simulation provided perfect cover for activities that had nothing to do with training exercises and everything to do with eliminating someone whose investigation threatened to expose years of systematic betrayal. The approach came from multiple directions simultaneously, with personnel wearing tactical gear that identified them as base security, but moving with the coordination of individuals who had conducted similar operations before. Their weapons were loaded with live ammunition, despite the supposed simulation status of the exercise, indicating that they were prepared for an outcome that would require explaining casualties as training accidents. Sage's defensive preparations proved their worth, as the first team attempted to breach her office through the main entrance. The seemingly standard government furniture had been modified to provide ballistic protection, and the office's communication systems automatically transmitted distress signals that would bring federal response teams to her location. The firefight that followed was brief but intense, with professional operators engaging in combat that demonstrated training levels far beyond what would be expected from routine-based security personnel. The opposition's tactics and equipment suggested coordination with agencies that had access to advanced military hardware and specialized training programs. When the shooting ended, 3 members of the assault team were down, and Sage had sustained injuries that would require medical attention but weren't life-threatening. More importantly, she had captured one of the opposition team members alive, providing the first opportunity to interrogate someone directly involved in the conspiracy she had been investigating. The captured operative proved to be a former military contractor whose service record had been modified to conceal connections to classified operations that officially didn't exist. Under interrogation conducted by federal agents who arrived within minutes of the firefight's conclusion, he revealed information that confirmed the scope of the conspiracy extended far beyond what they had previously understood. Admiral Langston has been running black site interrogations for the past 5 years, the captured operative revealed, under questioning that employed methods whose legality existed in gray areas of federal law. American personnel who got too close to understanding what really happened during classified operations. People who asked too many questions about missions that went wrong. The revelation sent shockwaves through the federal agents conducting the interrogation. If Admiral Langston was indeed behind the systematic elimination of American personnel who threatened to expose his activities, then the investigation had uncovered something far more serious than simple intelligence leaks. They were dealing with a systematic program of assassination designed to protect a criminal conspiracy that extended to the highest levels of military command. Sage listened to the interrogation from an adjacent room while receiving medical treatment for injuries sustained during the firefight. The information being revealed aligned with suspicions she had developed during her months of investigation, but the confirmation still came as a shock. The man she had been briefed by just hours earlier was apparently the mastermind behind the conspiracy that had killed her teammates and dozens of other American personnel. Operation Blood Moon was a setup from the beginning, the captured operative continued, his resistance breaking down under professional interrogation techniques. Langston provided the intelligence that led to the ambush. He needed your team eliminated because they had discovered evidence of his arms dealing with terrorist organizations. The words hit Sage like physical blows, each revelation adding another layer to the betrayal that had cost the lives of people she had loved like family. Her teammates hadn't died in combat against foreign enemies. They had been murdered by someone wearing an American uniform who had sold their lives to protect his criminal activities. The federal agents conducting the interrogation exchanged glances that carried implications extending far beyond the immediate investigation. If Admiral Langston was indeed behind Operation Blood Moon and the subsequent intelligence leaks, then they were dealing with a traitor whose activities had compromised national security at levels that could affect international relations. "How many other operations has Langston compromised?" Agent Harrison asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that the answer could reshape their understanding of recent military history. 17 that I know of directly, the operative replied, his resistance completely broken now that he understood the magnitude of what he had been involved in. Maybe more that he handled through other channels. He's been selling intelligence to foreign agencies for at least 5 years, using the money to fund black site operations that eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, extending far beyond what any of them had imagined when the investigation began. Admiral Langston hadn't simply been leaking classified information. He had been conducting a systematic program of treason that had cost dozens of American lives while enriching himself through arms sales to the same terrorist organizations that American forces were fighting overseas. As dawn approached, federal agents coordinated with military police to secure evidence at Norfolk Naval Base, while additional teams moved to apprehend Admiral Langston before he could implement whatever contingency plans he had developed for this scenario. The investigation that had begun with a punch in a briefing room had evolved into one of the largest counterintelligence operations in recent military history. Pike's desk held deployment benefit forms, comprehensive coverage that protects military families during high-risk overseas assignments. The irony was bitter, discussing insurance for military families while uncovering a conspiracy that had systematically murdered those same families' providers. At 6:30 a.m., federal agents attempted to apprehend Admiral Langston at the lake facility where Sage had been briefed the previous afternoon. They found the facility abandoned, with evidence suggesting that Langston had been monitoring their communications and had evacuated before the arrest teams could reach him. The investigation had identified the traitor, but he had escaped to continue his activities from an unknown location. The manhunt that followed involved multiple federal agencies and international cooperation from allies whose own intelligence operations might have been compromised by Langston's activities. The search extended beyond American territory to countries where his arms-dealing activities had established criminal networks that could provide sanctuary from American law enforcement. While the manhunt continued, the investigation at Norfolk Naval Base revealed the full scope of the facility's role in Langston's operations. The base had been systematically modified over a period of years to serve as a collection point for classified intelligence that was then transmitted to foreign agencies through channels that bypassed normal security monitoring. The technical assessment that Drake Sullivan prepared under Sage's direction revealed sophisticated modifications to the base's communication systems that had been installed through official channels but served unofficial purposes. Equipment that was supposed to enhance security had actually been configured to facilitate the theft of classified information. If that security lockdown shocked you, subscribe immediately because the biggest revelation is coming. Our channel exposes hidden military heroes. Hit the bell to witness the complete truth about SEAL Code Red. Elena Torres proved to be instrumental in mapping the network of personnel who had been unwittingly supporting Langston's activities through routine administrative functions. Her analysis of document handling procedures revealed how classified intelligence was being extracted from secure systems and prepared for transmission to external recipients. The pattern is sophisticated but traceable once you know what to look for, Elena explained during a briefing that included federal agents and counterintelligence specialists. Admiral Langston used his position to request intelligence summaries that appeared to be for legitimate operational planning purposes. Those summaries were then processed through channels that made them available to unauthorized recipients. The investigation revealed that Langston's activities had extended beyond simple intelligence leaks to include active sabotage of American operations overseas. The arms dealing that had provided him with financial resources had also given foreign terrorist organizations access to American weapons and technology that had been used against American forces in subsequent operations. General Harrison Pike, whose reaction to Sage's clearance level had initially raised suspicions about his potential involvement in the conspiracy, proved to be instrumental in coordinating the military response to Langston's betrayal. His knowledge of classified operations had made him suspicious of intelligence leaks, leading to the investigation that eventually exposed the full scope of the conspiracy. We've identified at least 43 American personnel who died as a direct result of intelligence that Langston provided to hostile organizations, Pike explained during a briefing that brought together representatives from multiple agencies involved in the investigation. The financial cost extends into hundreds of millions of dollars, but the strategic implications are even more serious. The revelation that a senior military officer had been systematically betraying American operations for financial gain sent shockwaves through the intelligence community and prompted immediate reviews of security procedures at facilities throughout the military establishment. The Langston conspiracy represented a fundamental breakdown of the trust that made classified operations possible. Sage's role in exposing the conspiracy earned recognition from the highest levels of government, though the classified nature of her investigation meant that most of the details would never become public knowledge. The personal satisfaction of achieving justice for her fallen teammates from Operation Blood Moon provided closure that she had never expected to experience. The manhunt for Admiral Langston continued for 18 months before federal agents finally located him in a country whose extradition treaties with the United States had been carefully structured to protect individuals like him. The arrest involved international cooperation at levels that required presidential authorization and diplomatic negotiations that couldn't be discussed in public forums. The leadership certification program on Sage's screen offered veterans direct pathways from combat roles to executive positions. Even as justice was being served, life continued with programs designed to help veterans transition to productive civilian careers. The trial that followed was conducted in closed sessions that protected classified information while ensuring that justice was served for the crimes Langston had committed. The evidence presented included testimony from Sage and other survivors of operations that had been compromised by his intelligence leaks, as well as financial records that documented the scope of his arms-dealing activities. Langston's conviction on charges of treason, conspiracy, and multiple counts of murder resulted in a sentence that ensured he would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. The civilian contractors and military personnel who had supported his activities received sentences proportional to their level of involvement and cooperation with the investigation. The systemic changes implemented in response to the Langston conspiracy included new security protocols designed to prevent similar betrayals in the future. Multiple oversight systems were established to monitor the flow of classified information, and personnel security procedures were enhanced to identify potential security risks before they could compromise operations. Sage's investigation had achieved its objectives, but at a personal cost that would require years to fully process. The confirmation that her teammates from Operation Blood Moon had been deliberately betrayed by someone they trusted added layers of grief to losses that were already difficult to bear. Feeling that justice satisfaction? Subscribe for more military vindication stories. We showcase real warrior comebacks that inspire. The bell guarantees you'll never miss another underdog triumph against corruption. Lieutenant Bradley Mercer, whose assault on Sage had initiated the chain of events that exposed the conspiracy, faced court-martial proceedings that resulted in his dismissal from military service and criminal charges for assault on a federal agent. His career ended in disgrace, but his actions had inadvertently contributed to exposing crimes that threatened national security. Elena Torres received commendation for her assistance in the investigation and was selected for advanced training programs that would prepare her for intelligence work at the highest levels of classification. Her moral courage in supporting Sage during the crisis had demonstrated character traits that made her valuable for sensitive assignments. Drake Sullivan's technical expertise proved instrumental in documenting the modifications that Langston had made to Norfolk Naval Base's communication systems. His detailed analysis provided evidence that was crucial to understanding how classified information had been extracted and transmitted to unauthorized recipients. General Harrison Pike assumed command responsibilities that had been compromised by Langston's activities and implemented security reforms designed to prevent similar betrayals in the future. His experience during the crisis had provided insights into vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed through systemic changes rather than individual disciplinary actions. The facility at Norfolk Naval Base was decommissioned from its role in classified operations and converted to training functions that didn't require access to sensitive intelligence. The modifications that Langston had installed were removed, and new security systems were implemented to ensure that the facility couldn't be compromised in similar ways. Captain Sarah Mitchell continued her role in counterintelligence operations, applying lessons learned from the Langston investigation to identify and prevent similar security breaches at other military facilities. Her experience coordinating the federal response to the conspiracy provided expertise that proved valuable in subsequent investigations. The federal agents who had participated in the investigation received recognition for their work in exposing one of the most significant espionage cases in recent American history. The successful prosecution of Admiral Langston demonstrated that no one was above the law, regardless of their position or security clearance level. As the immediate aftermath of the investigation concluded, Sage faced decisions about her future role in military and intelligence operations. The personal closure achieved through exposing Langston's crimes had fulfilled her commitment to justice for her fallen teammates, but it had also left her questioning whether she wanted to continue working in an environment where such betrayals were possible. The months following Langston's conviction provided time for reflection on the broader implications of the conspiracy and the systemic changes needed to prevent similar betrayals in the future. The investigation had revealed vulnerabilities in security procedures that extended beyond individual character failures to institutional problems that required comprehensive solutions. Sage's final report on the investigation was classified at levels that ensured it would remain secret for decades, but its recommendations influenced security reforms throughout the military and intelligence establishments. The lessons learned from the Langston conspiracy became part of training programs designed to help future intelligence professionals recognize and prevent similar threats. The memorial service for the victims of Operation Blood Moon and the other operations compromised by Langston's activities provided an opportunity for closure that had been delayed for years. The families of the fallen personnel finally learned the truth about how their loved ones had died, and the military community gained understanding of the scope of the betrayal they had endured. Norfolk Naval Base was transformed into a memorial facility that honored the memory of those who had died as a result of Langston's crimes while serving as a training center for security professionals who would work to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The base became a symbol of both the vulnerability of classified operations and the dedication required to protect them. Elena Torres, whose moral courage during the crisis had earned recognition from the highest levels of government, continued her intelligence career with assignments that built on her experience during the Langston investigation. Her ability to maintain ethical standards under pressure made her valuable for operations where personal integrity was as important as technical expertise. Drake Sullivan's technical innovations in detecting security breaches became standard procedures at military facilities throughout the world. His analysis of Langston's modifications provided insights that helped security professionals identify similar threats before they could compromise operations. The broader intelligence community learned valuable lessons from the Langston conspiracy about the importance of continuous monitoring for insider threats and the need for oversight systems that could detect betrayals before they resulted in casualties. The case became a textbook example of how personal motivations could lead to national security disasters. Sage eventually chose to continue her career in counterintelligence, applying the experience gained during the Langston investigation to prevent similar betrayals in the future. Her personal understanding of the costs involved in security breaches provided motivation that went beyond professional duty to include genuine commitment to protecting the lives of those who served. The systemic changes implemented in response to the investigation included new oversight mechanisms, enhanced security procedures, and training programs designed to help personnel recognize and report potential security threats. The military establishment demonstrated its commitment to learning from the crisis and preventing similar betrayals in the future. Years later, when historians were finally permitted to examine the classified records of the Langston conspiracy, they would recognize it as a turning point in American intelligence operations that led to fundamental improvements in security procedures and oversight mechanisms. The personal courage demonstrated by individuals like Sage Westfield became part of the institutional memory that guided future generations of intelligence professionals. The challenge coin that Sage carried in memory of her fallen teammates from Operation Blood Moon eventually joined other memorial items in a classified museum that honored those who had died protecting American interests overseas. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. It had led to discoveries that prevented countless other betrayals and saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. Lieutenant Mercer's assault in that Norfolk briefing room had triggered a chain of events that exposed one of the most significant security breaches in American history and led to justice for victims whose deaths had been deliberately caused by someone they trusted. The punch that was intended to humiliate and intimidate had instead become the catalyst for justice that had been delayed for far too long. The morning briefing where it all began was remembered not for the disrespect shown to a civilian contractor, but for the moment when hidden truth was finally exposed to the light of justice. The SEAL code that Sage had helped write was vindicated by the investigation that followed, proving that honor and integrity remained the foundation of American military service, despite the betrayals of individuals who had forgotten their oath. In the end, the conspiracy that had cost so many lives was defeated not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by the moral courage of individuals who refused to accept that betrayal was inevitable. The investigation proved that the American military establishment, despite its flaws and vulnerabilities, retained the ability to police itself and ensure that justice was served for those who served with honor. The legacy of Operation Blood Moon and the investigation that followed became part of the institutional memory that would guide future generations of military and intelligence professionals. The lessons learned through tragedy and loss helped create systems that would protect others from similar betrayals, ensuring that the sacrifice of those who died had meaning that extended far beyond their individual service. The story that began with disrespect in a briefing room ended with justice served and honor restored. The price paid for that justice was high, measured in years of investigation and personal costs that could never be fully repaid. But the victory achieved through persistence and moral courage proved that the American military establishment remained capable of rising above individual failures to serve the principles that made their service meaningful. Honor didn't need forgiveness. It only needed to be remembered. And in the institutional changes that followed of the Langston conspiracy, that honor was indeed remembered, preserved, and passed on to future generations, who would continue the mission of protecting American interests while maintaining the ethical standards that made that protection worthwhile. The punch that started it all was forgotten, but the justice that followed endured as a testament to the power of individual courage in service of institutional integrity. The SEAL code that Admiral Langston had perverted was restored to its proper meaning, and the memory of those who died protecting that code was honored through reforms that would prevent similar tragedies in the future. In the classified archives where the full story was preserved for future historians, the investigation would be remembered as proof that no betrayal is so sophisticated that it cannot be detected and defeated by individuals committed to serving something larger than themselves. The American military establishment had been tested by one of its greatest challenges and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed to the principles that made their service worthy of the sacrifice it required. The story ended not with perfect resolution, but with justice served and systems improved. The ongoing vigilance required to maintain security would continue, guided by the lessons learned through tragedy and the commitment to honor demonstrated by those who refused to accept betrayal as inevitable. The fight for integrity was never-ending, but it was a fight worth waging for the protection of those who served and the preservation of the principles that made their service meaningful. 3 years after Admiral Langston's conviction, the institutional reforms sparked by the conspiracy had fundamentally transformed how the American military establishment approached counterintelligence operations. The Westfield Protocols, named after Sage's investigation, became standard procedure at classified facilities worldwide, creating multiple layers of oversight that made it virtually impossible for a single individual to compromise operations on the scale that Langston had achieved. The protocols required that all personnel with access to classified information undergo continuous psychological evaluation and financial monitoring, ensuring that personal problems or ideological changes would be detected before they could lead to security breaches. The system was invasive by necessity, but the alternative, allowing another Langston to operate undetected, was unacceptable to military leadership that had learned the true cost of misplaced trust. Sage found herself serving as a consultant to the newly established Joint Counterintelligence Assessment Division, a multi-agency organization created specifically to prevent insider threats from compromising national security operations. Her experience during the Langston investigation had provided insights that proved invaluable in developing training programs for intelligence professionals who would spend their careers hunting traitors within their own ranks. The work was emotionally demanding, requiring constant vigilance against the very people who were supposed to be trustworthy allies. Each investigation carried the potential to uncover betrayals that could shatter institutional confidence and cost additional lives. But the alternative, allowing security breaches to continue undetected, was a risk that no one was willing to accept after learning the true scope of Langston's crimes. Elena Torres had risen rapidly through the intelligence establishment, her moral courage during the Norfolk crisis having marked her as someone who could be trusted with the most sensitive assignments. She now served as Deputy Director of Personnel Security Evaluation, responsible for developing the psychological assessment tools that helped identify potential security risks before they could compromise operations. Her work involved studying the behavioral patterns that preceded security breaches, analyzing the personal and professional factors that could lead loyal service members to betray their oath. The research was disturbing in its implications, revealing how easily ordinary people could be corrupted by financial pressure, ideological manipulation, or simple personal grievances against the system they served. The Langston case taught us that betrayal isn't always motivated by ideology or foreign influence, Elena explained during a classified briefing to senior military leadership. Sometimes, it's just greed combined with opportunity, and a gradual erosion of ethical standards that happens so slowly the individual doesn't recognize what they've become until it's too late. The psychological profiles developed through her research became part of the screening process for all personnel seeking access to classified information. The assessments weren't foolproof, No system could completely eliminate the risk of insider threats, but they provided an additional layer of protection that made systematic betrayal much more difficult to sustain. Drake Sullivan had transitioned from technical support to leading the Cybersecurity Assessment Division, where his expertise in detecting unauthorized modifications to secure systems helped protect classified facilities from both external hackers and insider threats. His analysis of Langston's modifications to Norfolk Naval Base had revealed sophisticated techniques for compromising security systems that were now used to train security professionals worldwide. The technical countermeasures he developed created multiple monitoring systems that operated independently of each other, ensuring that no single individual could disable all security measures simultaneously. The redundancy was expensive and complex, but it provided protection against the kind of systematic compromise that Langston had achieved through his position of authority. We learned that traditional security thinking focused too much on external threats and not enough on the possibility that the threat could come from within. Drake explained during a technical conference attended by security professionals from allied nations. Langston was able to compromise Norfolk because we trusted that someone with his clearance level and command authority wouldn't abuse that trust for personal gain. The technical solutions he implemented required constant updating as new threats emerged and technology evolved. The cat-and-mouse game between security professionals and those seeking to compromise classified systems was endless, requiring continuous innovation and vigilance from people who understood that a single mistake could cost lives. General Harrison Pike had assumed command of the Military Intelligence Reform Commission, tasked with implementing the systemic changes needed to prevent future conspiracies like Langston's. His experience during the Norfolk crisis had provided him with unique insights into how institutional failures could enable individual betrayals, and his reforms focused on creating accountability mechanisms that extended throughout the command structure. The Commission's work revealed that Langston's conspiracy had been possible partly because of a culture that discouraged questioning authority figures and placed too much trust in individual integrity without adequate verification systems. The reforms Pike implemented created multiple oversight layers that required collaborative verification for sensitive decisions, making it much harder for any single person to abuse their authority. Military culture traditionally emphasizes trust and loyalty, which are essential for effective operations, Pike noted during congressional testimony about the reforms. But we learned that blind trust without verification can become a vulnerability that hostile forces can exploit. The new systems maintain the trust essential for military effectiveness while adding verification mechanisms that protect against abuse. The cultural changes required by the reforms were perhaps more challenging than the technical modifications. Military personnel had to learn to balance respect for authority with healthy skepticism about individual motivations, questioning decisions that seemed inconsistent with established procedures without undermining the command structure essential for effective operations. Captain Sarah Mitchell continued her counterintelligence work, now focusing on international cooperation to address security threats that cross national boundaries. The Langston investigation had revealed connections between American traders and foreign intelligence services that required coordinated responses from allied nations working together to protect shared security interests. Her work involved developing protocols for sharing intelligence about insider threats while protecting the sources and methods used to detect them. The balance between transparency and security was delicate, requiring careful consideration of what information could be shared without compromising ongoing investigations or revealing capabilities to hostile intelligence services. The Langston conspiracy wasn't just an American problem, Mitchell explained during a classified briefing to NATO intelligence leaders. His arms-dealing activities provided weapons and intelligence to terrorist organizations that threatened Allied forces throughout the region. Preventing similar threats requires international cooperation at levels that challenge traditional concepts of national sovereignty. The international cooperation developed through her efforts created new mechanisms for detecting and preventing cross-border security threats. The systems weren't perfect. National interests sometimes conflicted with shared security objectives, but they provided capabilities that no single nation could achieve independently. The federal agents who had participated in the Langston investigation found their careers shaped by the experience in ways that extended far beyond simple professional advancement. Agent Harrison had been promoted to lead the FBI's new domestic counterintelligence division, while Agent Cooper headed the Naval Criminal Investigative Service's Enhanced Security Assessment Program. Their work involved applying lessons learned from the Langston case to identify and investigate other potential insider threats throughout the federal government. The investigation techniques they had developed proved effective in detecting security breaches that might otherwise have gone unnoticed until they resulted in casualties or compromised operations. The success of their methods led to requests for assistance from other agencies dealing with their own insider threat problems. The expertise gained through investigating one of the most sophisticated betrayals in American history proved valuable in addressing less dramatic but equally dangerous security vulnerabilities throughout the government establishment. The memorial established at Norfolk Naval Base to honor the victims of Langston's conspiracy became a pilgrimage site for military personnel seeking to understand the cost of security failures and the importance of maintaining ethical standards under pressure. The facility served both as a training center for security professionals and as a reminder of what happened when those protections failed. The memorial included not only the names of those who had died as a direct result of Langston's betrayals, but also recognition for the individuals who had risked their careers and lives to expose the conspiracy. Sage's name was prominently displayed among those whose courage had prevented even greater disasters by ensuring that justice was eventually served. Visitors to the memorial often commented on the contrast between the peaceful setting and the violent events it commemorated. The juxtaposition served as a reminder that security threats could emerge from the most unexpected sources and that constant vigilance was required to protect the freedoms that made such peaceful settings possible. The classified museum that housed artifacts from the Langston investigation became a training resource for intelligence professionals studying the psychology and methodology of insider threats. The exhibits included examples of the techniques Langston had used to compromise security systems, the financial records that documented his arms-dealing activities, and the communication intercepts that had eventually led to his exposure. The museum's most powerful exhibit was a recreation of the Norfolk briefing room, where the investigation had begun, complete with audio recordings of the confrontation between Sage and Lieutenant Mercer. Visitors could experience the moment when a routine security assessment had transformed into a life-or-death investigation that exposed one of the most significant betrayals in American military history. The educational value of the exhibit extended beyond simple historical documentation to provide insights into how small incidents could reveal larger patterns of corruption and how individual courage could make the difference between exposing wrongdoing and allowing it to continue undetected. The international implications of the Langston conspiracy continued to emerge years after his conviction, as Allied intelligence services discovered connections between his activities and security breaches in their own organizations. The investigation had revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond American borders, requiring ongoing cooperation to fully address its consequences. The arms dealing that had provided Langston with financial resources had also supplied terrorist organizations with American weapons and technology that appeared in conflicts throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. Tracking these weapons required forensic analysis that helped intelligence professionals understand how military equipment was being diverted from legitimate users to hostile forces. The intelligence that Langston had provided to foreign agencies had compromised operations conducted by Allied forces, leading to casualties among British, Canadian, and Australian personnel who had trusted American intelligence assessments that had been deliberately corrupted. The diplomatic implications of these betrayals required careful handling to maintain alliance relationships while addressing legitimate grievances about security failures. The financial investigation into Langston's activities revealed connections to international money laundering networks that facilitated arms dealing and terrorism financing on a global scale. Disrupting these networks required cooperation between law enforcement agencies that had traditionally operated independently, creating new challenges for international law enforcement coordination. The psychological study of Langston's transformation from decorated military officer to international arms dealer became a case study in how gradual moral compromise could lead to catastrophic betrayal. Researchers studying his personal history identified warning signs that might have predicted his eventual corruption if appropriate monitoring systems had been in place. The research revealed that Langston's betrayal hadn't happened overnight, but had developed over several years as personal financial pressures and professional disappointments gradually eroded his commitment to military values. Understanding this progression helped security professionals develop better tools for identifying personnel who might be vulnerable to recruitment by hostile intelligence services. The academic study of the Langston case contributed to broader understanding of insider threats and helped develop training programs that taught personnel to recognize the warning signs of potential security risks among their colleagues. The research was necessarily classified, but its conclusions influenced security policies throughout the federal government. The technological innovations developed in response to the Langston conspiracy influenced security procedures far beyond military applications. The monitoring systems created to detect unauthorized access to classified information were adapted for use in protecting corporate intellectual property and critical infrastructure systems from both external hackers and insider threats. The private sector applications of military counterintelligence techniques helped protect industrial secrets and financial systems from compromise by foreign intelligence services seeking to gain economic advantages through espionage. The technology transfer from military to civilian applications demonstrated how security innovations could benefit society more broadly. The legal precedents established through Langston's prosecution influenced how courts approached cases involving classified information and national security crimes. The successful prosecution demonstrated that it was possible to achieve justice for espionage crimes without compromising ongoing intelligence operations or revealing sensitive sources and methods. The sentencing guidelines developed for the case provided frameworks for addressing future espionage prosecutions, ensuring that penalties reflected both the individual harm caused by specific betrayals and the broader damage to national security that resulted from systematic corruption of classified systems. The legislative reforms prompted by the Langston investigation strengthened oversight mechanisms for classified operations and enhanced penalties for security violations. The new laws closed loopholes that had allowed Langston to operate undetected for years and created additional tools for detecting and prosecuting similar crimes in the future. The congressional hearings that examined the security failures enabling Langston's conspiracy led to budget increases for counterintelligence operations and enhanced training requirements for personnel with access to classified information. The investment was substantial, but lawmakers recognized that the cost of prevention was far less than the price of allowing similar betrayals to occur. As the 5th anniversary of Langston's conviction approached, security professionals reflected on the lessons learned and the progress made in preventing similar threats. The systems implemented in response to his betrayals had successfully detected and prevented several other potential security breaches, validating the investment in enhanced counterintelligence capabilities. The ongoing threat from insider violations required constant adaptation as new technologies created new vulnerabilities and hostile intelligence services developed new methods for recruiting American personnel. The fight against betrayal was indeed never-ending, but the tools available for that fight had been substantially improved through hard-won experience. The personal costs of the investigation continued to influence the lives of those who had participated in exposing Langston's crimes. The psychological toll of discovering such systematic betrayal within their own ranks required ongoing support from mental health professionals who specialized in treating the unique stresses faced by intelligence personnel. The knowledge that trusted colleagues could become deadly enemies created lasting changes in how intelligence professionals approach their work and personal relationships. The paranoia necessary for effective counterintelligence work had to be balanced against the trust required for normal human functioning, creating ongoing challenges for those whose careers involved hunting traitors. The families of those who had died as a result of Langston's betrayals found some measure of closure through his conviction and the systemic reforms that followed, but the grief remained an ongoing presence in their lives. Support groups for survivors of intelligence community casualties provided ongoing assistance for those dealing with losses that couldn't be fully explained due to classification requirements. The memorial services held annually to honor the victims served both as remembrance ceremonies and as reminders to current personnel about the importance of maintaining security and ethical standards. The ceremonies reinforced the human cost of security failures while celebrating the courage of those who had exposed the truth despite personal risks. The legacy of the investigation extended beyond the immediate participants to influence an entire generation of intelligence professionals who understood that their work required not only technical expertise, but also moral courage to confront wrongdoing, regardless of who was responsible. The case became a foundational example of how individual actions could either protect or compromise national security, depending on the choices made under pressure. The training programs that incorporated lessons from the Langston investigation emphasized that security was everyone's responsibility, and that even junior personnel had obligations to report suspicious activities regardless of the rank or position of those involved. The democratization of security responsibility helped create a culture where wrongdoing was more likely to be detected and reported before it could cause significant damage. The international reputation of American intelligence services, damaged by revelations of Langston's betrayals, gradually recovered as foreign partners observed the thoroughness of the investigation and the comprehensiveness of the reforms that followed. The willingness to confront internal corruption honestly, rather than attempting to cover it up, ultimately strengthened relationships with allied intelligence services. The academic and professional literature that examined the Langston case provided valuable insights for students of intelligence studies and security professionals throughout the world. The case study became required reading in graduate programs focused on national security and international relations, ensuring that future leaders understood both the vulnerabilities and the resilience of democratic security institutions. The decade that followed Langston's conviction demonstrated that democratic societies, despite their vulnerabilities to insider threats, possessed the institutional mechanisms necessary to detect, investigate, and prosecute even the most sophisticated betrayals. The investigation proved that no individual, regardless of rank or position, was above accountability when their actions threatened national security. The ongoing vigilance required to maintain security would indeed continue, but it would be informed by the painful lessons learned through the Langston conspiracy and strengthened by the courage of individuals like Sage Westfield, who refused to accept that betrayal was inevitable. The fight for integrity remained as challenging as ever, but it was a fight that democratic societies were capable of winning when they possessed the will to confront uncomfortable truths and implement necessary reforms. The story that began with a punch in a Norfolk briefing room had evolved into a comprehensive examination of how free societies could protect themselves from internal threats while maintaining the openness and accountability that distinguished them from authoritarian alternatives. The balance was delicate and required constant attention, but it was achievable when citizens and institutions remained committed to the principles that made their society worth protecting. The final lesson of the Langston investigation was perhaps the most important, that the price of freedom was indeed eternal vigilance, but that vigilance was most effective when it was exercised by individuals who understood that their personal integrity was inseparable from the security of the nation they served. Honor didn't need forgiveness. It needed to be practiced daily by people who understood that their choices mattered not just for their own careers, but for the safety and security of everyone who depended on their faithfulness to their oath.
Behind every uniform is a person trying their best. See each other with respect. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to TNG Story.